So for this next shot, we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different. This is going to be a predominantly, in fact, all natural light shot. We're actually looking down on the pool and the gardens from a balcony on the 6th floor. Now, we initially scouted this shot. We were up on the roof. We were trying to find the right angle. The roof was a little bit too high. There were a lot of vents and industrial pieces and stuff up on the roof. We opted not to shoot on the roof because A, I thought it was a little bit wonky, and B, I don't really want to show all that industrial paraphernalia, if you will, up on the roof. I want to show the nice clean hotel, not the HVAC side of things. So we opted to shoot one level down from the roof from the same perspective. So the goal of the shot is to get a nice, warm, inviting, soft, glowy feel to this whole exterior during the last hour or so of sunset. What I'm waiting for is the sun to get low enough on the horizon that it's a bit softer, it's not harsh overhead light. We have those beautiful long shadows, and we're going to do a little bit of sky replacement work to get a really inviting, warm feel. Now, right now I have Adam down there on a walkie-talkie. They're staging all the chairs, straightening everything out. There are hundreds of beach chairs down there around the beach and pool. Do not underestimate the amount of staging that these shots take. When you're doing the interior shots, of course, you're working in one little room, there's a lot of details, but for an exterior shot like this, when you're showing amenities in the pool and the beach and chairs and everything like that, there are possibly hundreds of chairs that need to be oriented, moved. They've got to set the back to a certain angle. So give yourself plenty of time when you're doing this. Make sure you do a thorough job. And again, the more you rush, the more likely you are to miss something. Of course, we can fix some of this in post. I do imagine we're going to be removing a few people in Photoshop, but the more that you can get in camera, the better. That's why we're out here 2 hours ahead of time, taking our time, making sure we nail it. One thing to keep in mind when you're booking a job like this is that many times it'll be in your best interest and the hotel's best interest to book these jobs during a less busy or the low season for the hotel. If this was a high season and it was the middle of winter or the middle of summer and every chair out there was occupied and it was a complete party scene, it would be impossible to get a shot like this done. So right now it's a pretty low occupancy time of the year. We're here in spring. We're not during any big spring break week. We haven't hit the summer rush, and again, we haven't hit the winter rush when everyone tries to leave the States to come to Hawaii for a weekend. So it's a pretty great time of year to be doing this. And again, keep that in mind when you're booking jobs. Your life will be much easier, if it's possible, to schedule around high season, low season, spring break, things like that. Now, in terms of lighting, this is a pretty tough shot. Like I said, I'm waiting for the sun to get low on the horizon so that the light isn't so strong and we get a nice, beautiful, golden backlit scene. I'm not going to light paint this because what I want to show is a more natural feeling, warm, inviting time of day. It is a very difficult lighting situation, and we're definitely going to be using a sky replacement to make this feel more inviting and appealing. As you can see, when I shoot right now, the sky is almost completely blown out, and I don't want that. I definitely know that I'm going to want to add some clouds, some sky, some interest back in to make this feel more realistic and, like I said, more inviting. So right now, as you can see, the sun is bouncing off the pool, kind of skidding back into the lens. I'm going to wait for the sun to get lower so that it's going to be less of a problem. I may have some reflections on the ocean, but I'm much more okay with that than having the pool turn into a giant white mirror. Let's take a minute to talk about time of day. You know by now that I love to have things backlit, whether I'm light painting or shooting into the sun. This, of course, is no exception. I want that light, I want that depth, I want the drama, I want the texture, I want the color that backlighting brings. I think it's kind of a hallmark of my photos at this point, so again, I'm waiting till sunset to get the perfect shot. If the sun rose in the morning and it was in the same location, of course, I would be up here in the room at 5 in the morning, getting the sunrise, getting that backlit feel. So as the sun moves and as the people move around, I'm just casually kind of taking shots every 5 or 10 minutes. Now, there's going to be maybe a 5 or 10 minute period where the light is absolutely perfect and I'm going to shoot like crazy. But right now, like I said, every 5 minutes I'm taking a picture to kind of show you guys how the picture progresses over time, and also so that I can save an area if a person decides to sit in the chair later and they weren't there before. I can easily fix that in Photoshop by having about an hour's worth of exposures over a long time period. Now, my goal for this picture is actually a golden hour warm inviting shot. This is something different. I think we've got plenty of twilights to deliver. I think we've got plenty of daytime shots to deliver. So I want to, again, give them something different, give them something warm and inviting, rather than a stereotypical twilight or daytime shot. This is a nice in-between that's soft and inviting. All right, guys, so we're now out on the balcony waiting for that perfect sunset. So sunset is at 7, and at about 6 o'clock, it's dinner time. People are starting to kind of trickle out. I imagine that the light will be perfect for this shot around 6:15, 6:30. I've got quite a bit of reflections going on down there. I thought a polarizer would help, but unfortunately it's not doing too much. There is one issue I do want to take care of, and that is the flare on the lens from the sun. What I'm going to do is actually one super simple trick. I'm just going to physically put my hand in front of the lens, block the sun, which will remove the flare, and then composite in the sky afterwards. When I block that sun, it'll get rid of the flare, but then again, I do want to make sure I get a clean sky plate, so I'm going to take my hand out, capture it without my hand in the way, and then put the two together in Photoshop. All right, guys, so you can see here, I can barely get my face behind the camera, but with the Cam Ranger's live view, I can so easily do this. All right, and as you can see here, guys, as soon as I put my hand over that sun, the color in the tree, the green gets much more saturated and contrasty. The flare from the lens goes away entirely, and the scene looks much better. Obviously, the problem is, though, I've got to remove my hand in the final image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to replace that sky entirely with a new one. I think for this shot, I'm going to end up going into my sky library and finding the perfect sky to match this image. One thing I do want to mention is that I have a library of thousands of skies. Every time I see a pretty sunset, take out my camera, take a few shots, add them into the library. I'm always replacing skies, always tweaking, and I think that many photos can be improved by just the perfect sky, which sometimes, as you know, you don't get on location all the time. All right, so what I'm actually doing right now is I'm using our assistant David and his wife Ryan, and I'm having them stand in as models for us. Because this is so big, such a big wide scene, I do want to make sure that there is some kind of element that'll ground us and remind us of how big this actually is. Otherwise, without the human scale, you tend to lose track of the size of what you're looking at. Now, if you'll notice earlier when we started shooting, that reflection in the pool was horrible. But now the sun has gotten lower in the horizon, the angle of the sun hitting the water has kind of lessened out, and it's almost completely gone now. So we've made big improvements on that, and you can see over the course of a couple hours how the light has changed from our scouting photos to our finished photo now. You want to make sure that you're not too late with these photos. As you can see right now, the shadows, there's almost more shadow than sunlight because the sun is so low in the horizon. But when the sun is a little bit higher, there's a good mix of shadow and sun. That's what you want. You don't want the foreground to be completely in shadow. You do need that sun, again, to bring out the texture and the depth. Once the sun has gone too low, like it is right now, I think we've lost the shot. It's time to move on to the next one. All right, so wrapping up the shot, and honestly, it seems pretty simple, right? We wait for the right light. We wanted to get it maybe about a half an hour before sunset. We get that nice warm golden light washing over the landscape. We found our composition. We staged the scene. We kind of just let the camera take a few pictures. I used one little model to add a bit of scale and humanity to this picture, but other than that, I think it's pretty good. So that being said, we're going to take all of our files, jump into Photoshop, and put it together. So we just wrapped up on location with our balcony sort of overarching pool shot there. And as you know from our time on location, I spent an hour or so just kind of photographing the scene and everything that happened within that scene as time passed. So we have a good amount of information to pull out here. And what I've been looking for, I went and I culled these already, but if you look through each of these frames, what you see is you see different people sort of walking around, you see different scenes unfolding in front of you, and because we're on a tripod, I can take the best or most interesting things that happened over the course of that hour and then take them out one by one to build basically a perfect ideal scene for this photo. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to take 6 or 7 different shots, take certain people, certain things happening from each of them, composite them together into one final image. We're also going to get into sky replacements, and we're going to change the aspect ratio of this shot a little bit because personally I feel like there is a bit too much foreground in relation to the sky. So we're going to do a sky replacement, we're going to extend the canvas a little bit and give our client a little bit more to work with. So that being said, we'll take a quick look at these photos here in Lightroom, and again you can see pretty cool scenes kind of unfolding, people being romantic and holding hands and whatnot as they walk around. And the one problem that immediately jumps out to me is the sun, right? Is coming straight into the lens. So I use my hand to block it. I know I explained that on location, but here you can really see the difference in contrast between my hand sort of blocking the lens and the sun coming straight into it. It just, that flare just kills everything. So when you shoot straight into the sun, make sure you do get a frame with your hand blocking the light so that you don't have that really flat kind of mushy feel, and then you can add the sky in after and make everything look perfect. So let's take these photos, and obviously some of these look a bit underexposed, some of them are a little too dark, a little too bright, and as usual I'm just going to pull up my shadows and pull down my highlights just so that I get all that information out that I can get. If I go too far, like you know, it starts to look really flat and kind of HDR-y, so I go to like -40, +50, somewhere in there, want to keep things realistic. And I'm going to do, can you believe how different the contrast is between these? I mean, look at that. It's almost like a different shot entirely. It's like vivid green here and then just flat awfulness here. So I really need to make sure we stay in this nice contrasty photo. But again, bring the shadows up, bring the highlights down, give us all that data to work with. And I'm just going to synchronize that to all of these photos before we get into Photoshop. I love the color. I love the warm green. It's one of my favorite things in terms of time of day. So I'm really happy with this otherwise. We got some nice gold light here. Let's go ahead, take these into Photoshop and put this together. All right, so in Photoshop, we're going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and we're going to browse to this lesson folder here. We're going to go ahead and open 1 through 9. Click OK. All right, and here is our sky frame, which was shot on, I think, a 5D Mark III or a 60 or something. Anyway, the megapixel dimensions are a little bit smaller than I think I was using a 5D SR for this rooftop shot, but that is not a problem. We'll stretch it and skew it and fit it in there. So for now, go ahead and hide that. And we'll make this guy full screen and get right in here. So let's go ahead and turn off all the layers except for our base. And here is, again, my hand sort of blocking that sky. Now the first thing I need to do is get rid of my hand, obviously. So I'm going to add a mask to my number 8 base hand layer here. Just a white mask. I don't need to fill it with black or anything. And I'm going to take my brush at 100% opacity with my foreground color at black. And I'm just going to sort of gently paint away my hand so I get the nice sky and make sure that there's a nice soft transition between the pre-hand and post-hand shots, if you will. If you zoom in, you can see there's like a little bit of artifacting or something. You can just do this to taste, but make sure you get in there and make sure you have a nice, somewhat seamless transition between the two images. It's not going to be perfect because the wind was blowing like crazy, but it's going to be such a small part of the photo that no one's ever going to have a problem with it. All right. Let's see if there's any other problem spots here. I'll probably just take this whole tree. So it looks good except for that one spot where my finger was kind of hanging out right there. So before we get too much further into this, just clean that up with a quick clone. Something like that. And then over here, that's just going to have to be blended in somewhat seamlessly. I'm not too worried about it because I know I'm going to put a sky down in there, and that's the really, really kind of just a hot spot where the sun's going to sit right in our horizon. We have that to sort of conceal it after the fact. So that being said, I've got rid of my hand. We're going to go ahead and build our scene down here. So what we're going to do is I've got these layers 2 through 7. I just labeled them various environs or whatever. And I like to just go through and I just take a quick glance at each of them. Like for example, in this one I've got the couple holding hands, which is pretty neat. In this one I've got another couple down here. I've got them coming back towards me, and I've got some people down here on the right. I have a couple over here walking in over the bridge. And I've got this solitary wanderer down here. And then lastly, we have all this activity. So I'm just going to sort of bring these together and make this scene somewhat full of life, more so than it really was while we were there. And again, I think these people are going to add a little bit of scale, a little bit of believability and motion to the shot so that it doesn't feel so empty and sort of sterile. All right, so this is number 1. And number 5, I think we'll go with number 7 here. So I'm going to Alt-click to add a black layer mask and just start to brush in my couple down here. Now if you're looking closely, you can see that the colors aren't a perfect match, so they look like they're a little bit warmer because I did not have my hand over the lens. They were kind of flaring. And what I'm going to have to do is adjust that. I'm going to go and make a curves layer here, and I'm going to clip it to that layer below, and I'm going to add, it looks like we need a little blue. And I'm going to take some of those reds out. And you can see it's a very subtle shift, but they had that sort of red cast all around them, and now they fit much more naturally into that environment. They might be a little bit too bright as well, so you can go back to the RGB channel and just pull that down until everything matches. And now you can really see how before they were a bit red, a bit hot, and now they blend perfectly into the scene. All right, so we have those guys added in. I'm probably going to want to clean up the head over here, and there's a couple people that I want to get rid of as well. So we'll keep building our scene, and then we'll just keep those in mind for when we go to finish off this file. And I can borrow different parts from different layers to basically erase or add people to and from the scene. So layer number 6, let's see. Has that couple again down here on the left. But I think for the time being, I prefer them right there, but I might use that to remove some of those extra people. And layer number 5 has them coming back, and there's a couple down here. I'm going to add these guys in. I'll clone up that stuff later. So it's going to be an Alt-click, take my brush, and just sort of paint these guys in. And there again, you can really see the colors don't really match up perfectly, and there's a branch a palm tree or whatever that blew in the way there, so we're going to have to be careful on this one. Take my brush and I'll just refine this a little bit and get right in there. And again, I'm going to have to match their color, so I'm going to make a new curves layer. And I'm going to pull out some of those reds and add a little blue. Maybe take out some greens too. Greens are in the shadows, so there we go. And if you turn that on and off, you can see how that halo around them was really dramatic. All right, so those guys are blended in. Let's go up to number 4 here. There's a couple down here, but I also remembered, let's see, is there a guy in the hot tub? Do we want that? Do we want these people walking around? There's these guys down here. I think I'm going to use number 2 here. So I'll Alt-click, add a black layer mask. I really like this girl walking across the bridge. A little bit of motion blur to her. And then we had some people over here as well. Make sure we get their shadows in there as well. Let's see. All right, so same story. Gonna have to add a curves layer and let's see, yeah, you can see they're all a little bit dark compared to the light around them. So I'll brighten them all up a little bit, but the colors surprisingly look somewhat okay. They look a little warm. So I'll suck some reds out just a little bit. And now they should blend rather seamlessly into that sunlight onto the bridge. All right, so I think that's looking pretty good. And I put some extra ones in there. You guys can play around with what you like. So I'm going to group all those together, layers 2 through 7, make sure that you get the curves in there as well. And I'm just going to call these people or something. And now we've added a little bit of life to our scene. And there's a couple other things I want to take care of before we get into the sky replacement. I feel like there's this big hot spot in the middle of the pool, which is kind of distracting. So if I go to my base layer here, it looks like that reflection was blocked by a cloud or something. So if I just paint out that pool on this original layer, we get some detail brought back, which I like a lot. Again, blend that all seamlessly together with those trees. So we have sort of our base layers established here. Again, I can turn that on and off, and you can see where we started from. And our scene's starting to come together. We've got a little bit of life in there. It's a nice color. Next up is to take care of the sky. So in this case, this is going to be a relatively simple sky replacement. I'll go ahead and turn on this sky layer. And what I'm going to do, I've matched up the location of the sun in my fake sky with the location of the sun in the actual photo. And I'm going to just free transform this, Command T or Control T, until it matches the edge of the frame. And I'm going to keep that sky right where it should be, right over that original sun. And let's make a new group and call it sky, so organized here. Drag that in. And I'm just going to add a mask. And very, very simply, I'm just going to paint away some of that sky that we don't really need. Again, keeping it nice and soft. We can refine this in a second, but I just want to have an idea of what I'm starting with. All right. So I'd like to see how this looks with an extended canvas. I feel like there's a bit too much foreground. So let's go to Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to adjust the height here. So I'll make the height, call it 8,000 pixels. There we go. And now we have a nice sky. A bit more drama than what we had before. This feels a bit scrunched or constrained. Let's take a minute and get our sky and water to look as good as it can. So I just did a quick mask here to kind of get an idea for what I needed to do. And this is going to be pretty simple, honestly. I want to kill this electrical HVAC box. So let's just delete this layer mask and hide our sky for a minute. I'm going to grab the pen. I'm just going to come in here, trace that roof line. Rather than clone that out later, I'll just cover with my sky. And using that pen, well, my screen is really jerky right now. I'm just going to trace the horizon right over the water. Doesn't have to be exact. Something like that. I'll come up. And we'll go ahead and hit Command Enter to activate the selection. Shift F6 to feather it a little bit. And apply that to the sky folder. And go ahead and turn on that sky layer again. And now, obviously along the horizon, it's not perfect. So I'm going to take my brush at 30% opacity on the group mask here, and I'm just going to brush that away so it blends seamlessly together with the trees. Be careful not to go over the building over here because we just removed the that big container on top. And there we go. And you may want to brush in a little bit of that sun over that kind of wonky blend on the water, so that we get something like that. That way we hide it without having to really deal with it. I mean, you could go in there and clone it so it's perfect, but if I can cheat and save myself work, I totally will. All right, so we have a nice, even blend of our sky coming right over that pool. And people are gonna be like, oh, it's a little bit blown out. Why is it blown out, man? And I'm okay with it being blown out. We're looking right into the sun. If it wasn't blown out, it would look a little funky. So it's okay with going white. I want to keep this nice and bright, kind of keep that golden, airy, late afternoon light sort of feel. So I'm okay with this going to white. Again, that is the sun. I do want to keep this somewhat bright and moody. Okay, so the sky's looking good. Let's go ahead and color this a little bit. So in order to blend the sky better with the foreground, I'm going to take out some of the blues here. So what I'll do in the sky folder, add a hue and saturation layer, and grab my little hand tool here, click on my blues, and I'm just going to slide that down a little bit. And you can adjust this to your taste. And if we come over to the right on that slider, we go into the more sort of blue rather than cyan territory. And then that's looking really good. So the next thing I'm going to do in order to blend everything more seamlessly together is create a solid color layer. And we're going to go to orange, like a nice light afternoony orange. And I'm going to put that on top of everything rather than in that sky group. And adjust this to a little better color, I think. Something like that. I'm going to set the opacity to like 10 or maybe 8%. And I'm going to change the blend mode to color. And what that's going to do is it's just going to kind of put a light golden wash over everything, over the sky, over the foreground. So all of the things that covers sort of take on a little more of that warm golden tint, and everything looks a bit more naturally blended together. All right. So let's see what else we've got to do. I think I've got to clean up the grass down here. It's looking a bit messy. Again, these hotel images need to be, for the most part, perfect, and I don't want any brown, sort of burnt grass over everywhere. There's a bunch of it up here. I'm going to take out some of these messy lounge chairs. We did a really good job cleaning up all these chairs throughout the property. I'm just going to look and make sure that we didn't leave any flipped down, like back here. We can flip that up. I'm going to try to clean these people up a little bit here. So let's just start investigating that and see what we can do. So if I go back down into my environs layers, if you will, I'm just going to turn a couple of these on until I find one where that chair might be flipped up again. And it's actually going to be on our base layer, so I can duplicate this base layer, bring it up back into this folder. I'm going to rename it so it makes sense. And I'm going to Alt-click to add a black layer mask. going to go ahead and flip this chair back upright. And again, I'll rename that chair back. And I got to blend it, so I'm going to add a curves layer. It looks like there's like a lot of green in there or something. And I definitely want to add some blue. And now obviously we've got some purpley bits, so we've got to pull some red out. And I think we can refine that a little bit. All right, so there's our, for example, one of many chairs that I've had to flip up. Let's see if I can get this one too down here. All right, so it looks like we're going to have to fake this one somehow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see. If I'm going to grab this over here, this whole cushion. I'm going to go Command-Shift-C, Command-V to paste it. And I'm just going to drag this all the way over to here. I'm going to flip it horizontally, and we're going to skew it in there. Till it looks like it belongs. Might be a sizing thing too. All right, let's add a mask. And I'm just going to erase parts that I don't need here. Going to put a little warp filter on this. All right, now we can call that the top of the chair. All right, and now for the bottom of this chair, I'm just going to copy from the one next to it. Similar process. Command-Shift-C, Command-V. Drag that over. Skew it so it lines up. And then we'll make this a bit smaller so it matches. Warp it a bit. And that is a tiny, tiny little fix. When you zoom out, you see how small it really is. So just clean it up. All right, we'll group these together. And looks like I lost some of the palm tree there, so we can mask that back in. There we go. Now I'm going to remove these these are my assistants down here, just sort of messing around. Again, I probably can just hide them on this base layer. So I will just duplicate that and rename this remove assistants. Alt click out of black layer mask and just sort of brush them away. And again, this is going to take some color matching with curves, but won't be a problem at all. Get these guys out of there too. All right, so let's go ahead and fix those colors. I'm going to clip that curves layer to the layer below it. Needs a little exposure bump to match. Maybe some contrast would help. Clone that away. Make that a relatively quick fix. All right. For the most part, it looks like we've built our scene pretty well. What I want to do here is now use frequency separation to clean up the grass and the messy concrete and everything. So just as I've done before, it's going to be the last thing that we'll do for this image. So Command-Alt-Shift-E to flatten all to a new layer twice. I'm going to name the bottom layer color and the top layer texture. And go ahead and blur that bottom layer. Somewhere between 12 and 20 pixels. And now we're going to apply the top layer to the bottom layer using these settings in the dialog box. There we go. And we're going to change the blend mode to linear light. And now this is just me. I'm working mostly on the texture layer, but for example, where we have the right texture but the wrong color, for one quick example down here, we have this brown color and this green texture. If I take that texture and clone it, remember you want your clone sample to be set to current layer. I take this texture of the grass and clone it over that brown there. The result isn't going to be that great. So what I have to do is now take the color layer and sample some of this green color and then paint it over. And what you get is that perfect grass with the texture and color rather than just the texture. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can do the same if you're following along. If you're following along, feel free to do this to your heart's content, but we're going to speed this up so that you don't fall asleep watching me clone. So let's go ahead and take care of that right now. None of this is anything new, it's just the same technique applied in different ways. So that was like 20 or 30 minutes of frequency separation and cloning and faking things. And such is life when you're shooting a hotel and things aren't perfect. But what I ended up doing was I gave myself some crop lines because I'm looking at this image and like some of it, I just feel like it was a little bit too lopsided. So I ended up cropping a little bit of it. And that way I saved myself some time in post with the cropping. And if I go ahead and crop to those crop lines that I made, I will show you the difference that frequency separation makes. So something like that. And if I turn that frequency separation group on and off, you can see, like if I zoom into 100, this is well past 100% here, and turn that on and off, the cloning is, it's not perfect, but it's really good considering we're so far past 100%. And I had to make some things up here and there and cheat a little bit. But on the whole, if we're at, what are we at for a zoom here? We're at 225% zoom. And if I go to 100, honestly, things look pretty dang good. So that was me doing a quick and dirty frequency separation job on this. So it is a tool that is well worth mastering. And I think this shot is pretty much good to go. So I'm going to Command-Alt-Shift-E and flatten all to a new layer. Drag out some ruler lines to make sure everything's nice and vertical. I've only really got one line to go on. I'll make sure my horizon's nice and straight too. It looks like things are pretty good for the most part. So I'll go ahead and save this shot. So I've gone ahead and cropped and straightened this, and I think the shot is, all things considered, pretty great considering the circumstances. I love the sky replacement, love the coloring, and love the little life that we added. So let's save this, put it away, and go back on location. We have a really cool twilight at an amazing restaurant to shoot tonight.